Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second session of the two-part knowledge series. Today, we are going to talk about building SaaS products that customers love, specifically focusing on deep research elements, rapid testing, and also with a highlight of the product managers and designers, how they can collaborate. As we talk about these topics, to unpack it a little bit for you on the aspects that we are going to cover, we'll be starting with Intuit and Intuit's journey to self-disrupt and continuously innovate for our customers, and what is our secret sauce in sort of building these products. And then we will break out to take actually a couple of use cases, the examples as a case study to look at how we do customer obsession, even during, for example, the pandemic times, building the customer empathy, understanding the data, and how do we define the right problem. Then we will also take another example to look at how we can actually look, how we went typically go broad and build continuously test and fail fast so that we can arrive at the right solution for our customers. And then we will wrap the session with key takeaways. If you have been wondering, as I've been speaking for a while, who I am, my name is Muthu. I'm leading mid-market growth for QuickBooks at Intuit. Last decade, I spent with SAP building, launching, managing cloud products. I also hold a couple of patents. I frequent to conferences and also to talk series and business schools to talk about design thinking and product management, which are my passionate topics. Coming to Intuit, Intuit is a proud maker of products like TurboTax, QuickBooks, Main, Credit Karma, and even our latest addition in the family, which is MailChimp. All of these products, these are for the direct, we have products for the direct end consumers, the small businesses, and also for financial institutions. One of the things, if you look at Intuit's journey, is that right from the beginning, in this more than 3 decades of journey, right from the beginning, one thing that Intuit was able to do really well was its ability to self-disrupt and reimagine for the time or the period that we are operating on. It's not to wait upon what competition says, what else is happening in the market, but it is to always follow the customers and the pattern that they are doing and they are following, so that we can self-disrupt and reimagine ourselves over a period of time. When it comes to web, how do we move on to the cloud offerings? When it comes to mobile, how can all our offerings start to have the mobile offerings to it? And all the while to now, when we are looking at data platforms and expert enabled data platforms with all the interactions and the financial data platform interactions happening, along with the AI ML algorithms, which is making the whole products into smart built ones. Now, the reason why we are able to do it is also the process that we are following. And here I'm presenting you a very simplified version of this process, which is essentially for any scale. It could be a new feature, a smallest feature, or it could be a module, or it could be to the scale of a product. We always, there is two things that's kept in always for us to get it right. So the very first aspect is about customer obsession, which means the amount of research that we do, the rigor that we have in our research, including the primary research, the amount of data that we handle, that we crunch for each of the problem that we are planning to solve for, so that we can actually arrive at the right problem itself. Only when we choose the right problem, then we go ahead, not to directly build the problem, but then to go broad, to look at all possible options for solving the problem, looking at multiple concepts, rapidly testing it, and then building it iteratively, and shipping it continuously to our customers. Now, to better understand this, we are going to take a case, one focusing primarily around the research side, and the other focusing primarily around the problem and the building iterative part of it. So in terms of the customer side, let me start with this case, which is also going to be an interesting example, because the whole part of this research was conducted during COVID times, which means all of us were working virtually. So how is even remote empathy possible? And all of those aspects we can, some of the tools that we use to best replace customer interactions, we can discuss about as we go in. The simplified products, the problem statement of where we started for this case is that, QuickBooks is an established product. But then while the foundational features are taken care, we are continuing to innovate for our customers. All our product managers, the product designers, the product development team, all of us are continuously innovating for our customers, right? We are developing a lot of new features and new innovations, and we are introducing them continuously to our customers. But what we have noticed is, the new feature, when it comes to the adoption of new features, it's much lesser than some of the foundational features that the product was offering. While we believed that these features have an impact for a lot of customers to be using, it was still not adopted to what business believed the adoption should be. So we started looking at, hey, we have been building a lot of these features. It's time for us to stop, reflect, and see, what is the problem here? Why customers are not using these new features, for which also we followed the same process and we built it in the same customer obsessed way, but they are still not using it. Where is this missing? For those who are using, they are all going gaga about it. But then but the adoption itself is low. How can we increase it? Is where we started. So the driving team, of course, for any research, you would need a cross-functional team with all functions, including marketing, care, and product developers as well. But then the driving force for this team was essentially product designers and the product managers. And we started looking at, very first, the product data. When I say product data, this includes the product usage data. For example, what is the frequency they are logging in? When do they, what are the features that the customers are using? What percentage of customers are using new features? What are the similarities between them, those who use the feature and those who are not using the feature? What is the sales data indicating? Is it a certain period where, is there, if they buy in a certain period, does it has correlation towards them to using a certain feature? What is the cancellation data indicating, and so on? In this case, the cancellation data was also a lot of eye opener for us, because it pointed a lot of a bucket of users who were saying, hey, I wanted a feature for doing X, and that is not there in your product. And we were like, hey, it's exactly there. We just launched it. And similarly on the usage side as well, when we look at the foundational versus the the new features that we launched, the gap that we see in terms of the adoption rate. So the data was telling us that the new features are not adopted well, but at the same time the customers were actually looking for those features also. So that's the first point where we started. And at the same, and then we also coupled it together with qualitative, because always when you do quantitative research, the first part of your equation, but then you have to couple it with qualitative research for you to get the real answers, right? So then we looked at, for example, how customers are discovering the features. Why are they not using some of the features? Typically how they find some of the new features and start to use it and stuff like that, right? So we spoke to a lot of customers. Again, as I mentioned, this is where the difference comes in. In a normal world, we would have done it with what a process that we call as follow me homes, which means we would have visited our customers directly to their house, to their homes, to their offices, following them, observing them, looking at how they are using the product, and then understanding some of these insights directly. But given the pandemic stage that we were in, all of this had to be done virtually, right? So what are those things? What are the best friend tools that we had at this point in time, right? Of course, Zoom, the video calls, because that's the next best alternative to seeing someone in the person. And then we have to also look at this whole brainstorming aspects and the ideation aspects also. This is very important for a research and documenting all of these, what we are learning. And the cross-functional team collaborating on our documentation is also very important, which means, Figma, Mural, and Google Docs became the center of what we did, right? So, all the Google Docs for our repository of parking all our research materials, where the entire team can collaborate on one hand side. And when it comes to doing, quickly explaining a concept, doing all with Figma, and doing murals, for example, ideating, voting, all of those aspects, made simpler with Mural, for example. Also to classify the problems, and applying frameworks to look at the pattern between the problems, that the data that we were collecting, for example. Here is what some of our customers said. Some of our customers are like, when we were asking about, hey, there is this new feature which could be very relevant for you, but why aren't you using it? They're like, hey, where do I find it? I did not know about it. Right. So a lot of them were saying, hey, I did not know that there is this new feature that is there in the product. Right. Which made us curious. Hey, what is happening? What is the insight? Yes, the customers are not aware about the features, but aren't we communicating? No, we are absolutely communicating. We are communicating with emails and pop-ups in the product. Right. Emails are those which is like, to the customer base telling, hey, here is this great new feature that can simplify your business. Right. So these kind of emails are also going out. And there is also pop-ups, which is like when you open the product, you would have seen in several products for that matter. You open a product, there will be a pop-up which says, hey, here is something new. Right. But then what we were, during this research, the eye-opening aspect for us is that, for example, if you take this pop-up, which is one of the frequent way of how products introduce new feature to their customers, as soon as you land, you may be landing on your mailbox, you may be landing on your chat box, you may be landing on a product, and then, suddenly there is a pop-up trying to introduce you something. Most of the time, why it is not effective is that the users were coming to the product with a task in hand. They have a job and they want to get that job to be done, and they are opening the product. You are blocking their way to introduce a pop-up which says, hey, here is a great new feature, right? But it is blocking me from that job to be done. So what I do, my first instinct as a user is that, I dismiss it, and then I get to my job, and then I'm wondering, hey, I saw something which could have been interesting for me, but where do I find it now? Often they miss now the context about how can they again go back to that aspect to find that new feature after doing the job. Similarly, in case of email, it was often treated as, this could be something marketing that the company is sending, so I may not be opening a lot of these, very good feature emails. Even when it is targeted to customers for whom it is relevant, it was falling sort of like the CTR was even most of the time was less than 5%. Right. So that means the existing communication methods, although it is communicating to a small segment of customers, it's not working in scale. And even though the features are important for the customers, these communication methods needed to be changed. That was our primary insight that we arrived at. Here are some of the examples of how we did different prop-ups within the product while we were earlier doing it. And then what we did is, based on this insight and what was earlier there in the product, including the emails and the different ways of messaging inside the product, we arrived at a concept of, okay, what if we introduce these feature contextually to customers, right? So any feature introduction, any messaging, only contextual, and no messages at the open of the product. If I open the product, I'm coming with a job in hand, that user won't be disturbed. Only inform him about the new features which are relevant for that business at the time of when they're doing something related to it. Then talk about those features, right? So as a concept, we were deliberating, hey, can we do something like this, right? And then what we did is, at this stage, do we go ahead and build? No, not at all. Always we want to make sure that this is the right problem, this is the right solution before we solve it, right? So then what we did, we created concepts, we rolled out surveys, we took it also to customers to directly present these concepts to them to see how it is working. Only after getting that validation that this could potentially solve their problem and help them, and we could become that actually these messages can be seen as a useful recommendation and not as an annoying pop-up that is coming in the product, given the context that can be placed inside the messaging, is our important finding from the research. Only then we were able to, for example, arrive at what is the let's say the what is the right problem statement and what is the right way to solve that problem statement. And that's when we went forward ahead to actually solving it. That helped us frame our hypothesis. If we make smart and relevant recommendations at the right time, it would lead the users realizing the value of the product, because imagine, if you're using any product, you're paying your subscription, and you would expect a return of investment, a value back from the product, right? So if that product is continuously innovating, that's a value that is given to you, and only if you are consuming that value, you will be more and more happy about that product, which means you will be sticky with that product, which in turn means for the business increased retention. So that means any feature, unless if we do not introduce in a smart and relevant and a contextual manner, we may be missing out our communication aspect. Hence we wanted to change that whole communication by making it contextual, right? So with that, for that, when it comes to, a product of this scale where there's so many features, and we are continuously developing a lot more features, it's not something very simple such that, hey, here is a framework, here is how we introduce features. No, it needs a lot of principle to be defined, because there can be conflict between the features, there can be conflict while we are developing. So it is very important for us to design principles to be defined for designing or solving this problem at scale, right? Which means any message that is part of this framework that we have to build has to be targeted, which means the usage attributes of the customers and the AI/ML models to make it more smart. Those are the number one rule, that these messages shouldn't be a blast off, like what we call as a machine gun kind of an approach. No, it's no more the world where you say, hey, send it to a million people, even if one person converts. No, we want to be hyper targeted to exactly the customers for whom it is relevant to, right? And then contextual, right? Only when they are doing or using a workflow which is relevant to the new feature that is launched. Like for example, let's say I'm creating an invoice, and then there is now a possibility to insert an online payment link into the invoice. Only on that context we introduce this new feature, right? So how do we contextually introduce these features? Only contextually introduce this feature is another design principle. And then the dynamic content, because of the nature of this whole products, the system shouldn't be something like release dependent, or you cannot change the content continuously, right? So irrespective of whatever time frame the product is following, the content should be continuously be able to change, so that we can actually target, for example, better conversion. Because when it comes to messaging customers, even after we do it targeted contextually, the thing that is going to improve the CTR is only the copy that we put in. That has to sound very, very relevant for customers, otherwise they will lose the trust. It has to be non-disruptive, which means at this stage, when we talk about contextual, they're doing a work. So your message shouldn't be blocking their screen. Pop-ups, no, right? So it has to be something that comes and sticks on the screen and waits for you until you have time to finish your workflow one and look at, hey, what is that relevant feature which is relevant to workflow one, right? So it has to be non-disruptive, and it has to be spaced efficiently. We have to make sure that this is not happening frequently. This is happening only when this is hyper relevant for the customers, right? So those are the design principles that we have to arrive at to solve it at scale. With that, we arrived at this solution, which is arriving only when users does a certain action, and they fall under a certain business rule bucket. Like for example, they've done that action a certain number of times, and then also backed by our ML algorithms to increase the relevancy, to make sure that they are even relevant for this feature. If they are not relevant for that feature, why talk about to them? Those are the aspects that we use to present these messages in a very relevant fashion to the customers. Here are some of the examples that we have also at the bottom. So this is a classic case where defining the problem was everything, right? Because individually, if we had looked at different features, the feature adoption could have been gone in a completely different direction. It's that the individual features were done right in terms of solving the customer problems which it is planning to address. But then it's essentially how we deliver these features to customers that required the change, and then also looking at that holistically, including the existing methods and doing the research, helped us to frame that right problem statement of that it has to be hyper targeted and contextual, which then made your entire solution equation very easy, because when you know what you are solving for, you are already 80% there, right? So with that, we are now going to move towards the second segment of this session, to talk about how, once you define the problem, how you can go for broader options. And for that, let me invite my colleague and design partner, Natarajan. Thank you.
Thank you, Muthu. Now that we have seen how to build deep customer empathy and how to find the right problem to solve for, let's look at how to solve for that problem in the right way. Now, for this section, we're going to use another problem statement for deep diving. Right? This was solved during pre-COVID times, so you might see images or hear me talk about how we did things in person, but I will talk about how we are doing the same things in the new normal aspect. So in this section, we will look at how we go broad with solutions for a problem statement, narrow down the best approach, iterate on it, and build it out. Now, if you're wondering who I am, well, I'm Natarajan. I'm a design manager at Intuit. I lead the design team for our Plus and Enterprise products. I also lead the platform team for QuickBooks Desktop. I have over 10 years of experience working on IoT, home automation, and financial apps. Have been freelancing with different brands as well. Super excited to talk about a topic I'm passionate about. What we were trying to solve, right, is that we started with the insight we had from the product, which was that when people purchased our payroll service with their QuickBooks product, the time taken to run their first payroll was huge. We had instances where people purchased the service and were running the first payroll 3 weeks later. That is not good at all for the product. So we started with a goal of how do we get our payroll customers to run payroll for their employees accurately within a day of purchase. This is what in Intuit we call a big, hairy, audacious goal or bug. So using deep research, data, and developing customer empathy, like what Muthu was talking about, we found three major problems that we wanted to solve for. And I will be taking you not through all of them, but just one of them, which took us the long amount of time for us to finish working on that. Now, for a customer to run payroll, what we really need is to know if they have run payroll before using any other software or manually in that financial year. The reason we need to know this is because we need to know how much they paid their employees before, so that we can make sure that the taxes calculated for every payroll run that they do in our product is calculated correctly, and they do not need to pay extra tax or have to pay extra tax at the end of the year to the government, right? So now, just taking an example, now if the customer has purchased the software in Q1 of the financial year, let's say, the data they have to enter is probably zero or very, very minimal. But if they onboard to the software in, let's say, Q3 or Q4, that is a huge amount of data, or depending on the number of employees they have, of course. Now, you have to remember that we are doing this for our US customers. And if you look at how payroll is run in the US, it's usually every 2 weeks or even sometimes every week. So if I, as a customer, I have to start entering data about how much I paid each of my employee every paycheck. And if I'm doing this, let's say in September or October, and if I have even 10 employees, that's a huge amount of data that I need to enter. Now, all of this data in the previous experience was entered manually. So that takes a lot of time for people to enter the data. And that's why that it takes a long time for them to actually get to their first payroll run. Now, our problem was how to simplify this manual data entry process, which I realize is not an easy task once you get into it. So the team involved in this were 2 product designers and 1 product manager. Our process was very similar to the Google Ventures design sprint, if you know about it, but we modified it so that it suits Intuit. Now, if you don't know what the Google Venture's design sprint is, I will explain when I'm talking about the whole process that we went through. Now, how we started was that we had both the designers and the PM in the same room, just whiteboarding the different solutions. So we would have the PMs and the designers list down all the ideas that came to them. Then we would brainstorm on what ideas would work and what ideas would not work. Basically, we would do voting. We would figure out, hey, how does this work in context of these ideas? And we just brainstormed all day long just to figure out what those list of ideas are and what would work and what would. Once we had a concrete high level idea, we would now put that into design. Now, when I say design, I'm not referring to full high fidelity visual designs, but really low fidelity drawings, possibly on paper or on post-its. So we would start with just listing a lot of ideas and then see what could some of the solutions would be for these ideas, and then make sense of them and draw them out. Now, this is all of this, we were doing this pre-COVID. So we were in a meeting room doing all of this in front of a whiteboard. How do we do this now? Just like Muthu mentioned, we use a lot of tools like Mural, Figma. There's something called FigJam and Figma. It's amazing if you want to brainstorm, add votes, just draw out solutions. It works, right? Or any other collaborative tools, like you could still use Google Slides, Keynote, etc. That also works. So this is how we used to put out ideas, vote on them, and possibly draw out solutions as well. Now, for this track that we were working on, we all gravitated towards one idea, which we all loved, and we really wanted to build it out. Right. The next step is for us to start prototyping. Now, because we all love this idea, what we decided was, hey, let's do direct visual designs of this. Let's not do prototypes. We will do direct, spend time, build the visual designs, and then test it out. But then we were like, okay, because we've started the sprint, let's just do a high level idea just to check. But even though we were pretty sure this idea is going to work. So what we would do, we would take those drawing solutions that I talked about. We would take photographs of these. We will put them on Google Slides, Keynote, or we would sometimes use InVision or Figma and stitch them together using hotspots so that we now have a low fidelity prototype ready. So it's clickable, it's low fidelity. And so this is ready for us to test the idea with our customers. So usually we would have 2 or 3 prototypes every design sprint, but because we were super hyped up with this one idea, we just did one. Right? Next, it was time to test with our customers. Now, we at Intuit have a robust customer connect program that allows us to connect, learn, and test concepts with our customers. Using that, we would have online user test sessions where we would showcase the prototypes, understand what works, what are our opportunities. We sometimes even do co-creation sessions with our customers to just find a solution. Just because we said that this is pre-COVID, we were still doing this online because we are out of India, our customers are in the US. So we still did this with Zoom. So when we even shifted to the pandemic way of working, it still continued doing because we were still remote anyway. We started testing our one idea that we put together just to see how good it is, because we were in our minds, it was already the best solution that we could present to the users, right? Funnily enough, though it was heartbreaking at that time, the idea that we all loved failed miserably, right? None of the customers we talked to said they would prefer doing it that way. Apparently, it seemed like more work than the problem that we were trying to solve, which was quite eye-opening to us because we did not expect that. Yes, we were heartbroken, but the one good thing that we did was that we did not do visual designs that early. We were still testing it with high-level workflows, high-level drawings. So it was easy for us to pivot. So what we did was we took that learning from these sessions, used them in our next design sprint, and we completely pivoted the solution to something else, and we started testing that, right? When we started testing the new pivoted solution, we also learned about what would work with this solution, what wouldn't work with the solution, took that back, and again refined the solution, went back, tested it again. Now, if I remember correctly, we did about 4 or 5 design sprints with about 3 high-level pivots and talked around 50 customers before landing on the solution that we wanted to build. What we learned from this and what is the key takeaway is that the best idea that you think would solve the problem for the customers could end up being the worst solution. So it's always a good idea to test your idea, always test your ideas. Keeping them at a high level helps you not investing a lot of time on the solution, and you can quickly pivot at that level if it fails. So remember, it's always good to keep your ideas at a high level when you're testing them for the first time, so that you know what is working, what is not, and it's easy for you to pivot. Next, what we will do is we'll look at narrowing down on the solution. Once we decided on a high level solution, the next step was to create high fidelity flows for us to test interaction and visual design. Now, this sounds a lot of design stuff that we're doing, but I must say that we had our PM every step of the way. Our PM kept us honest on things like learning curve, whether we're building something that requires too much understanding or domain knowledge for the user to do it. They gave us feedback on accessibility, whether this works, whether this does not work, and also on keeping us honest on existing interaction design paradigms that exist in the product, so that we don't deviate and bring something new, right? So what we as designers working with PMs would do is create end-to-end flows, and again use the customer connect that I talked about to talk to our customers and figure out the nitty-gritties of the solution, which meant like, hey, does this content work? Hey, does the button here work, or should we move it somewhere else? Does this flow work for you? Does this data entry method work for you? To understand what you're starting to do, what you're doing in the middle, and how do you end it, right? So we were testing out all flows, all possible flows, everything on the screen, and that's how we started arriving at the solution that we wanted to develop, right? Now, for this project, what happened was we ended up with three ways of how can we simplify entering data, right? Because we started out with the problem like, how do we simplify entering data? So we had now three ideas, and we wanted to test what works with most of the folks. Now, we talked to 10 customers as our qualitative research. Interestingly, all 10 gave us varying feedback. So we were quite baffled at what to choose. So we went with what works best, which is quant. So we did a round of quant survey as well. So we have a cycle, a quant survey cycle in Intuit, where for each product we reach out and ask about, hey, this is something we're building. Could you give us feedback? So we use that cycle and we reached out and we asked for feedback. So what did we do? We actually sent out the prototype to them so that they could go through it themselves, right? And give us feedback and give us a rating as well. So with this, we were able to get a far better understanding of which of the options work and also what little tweaks we needed to make them better, right? Once we made the tweaks, we created a refined end-to-end flow, and you guessed it right, we did user testing again. And this time it went well, and we knew that we had the flow that we wanted to get to our users for. Building iteratively, which is one of the most important aspects of how you deliver awesome to your customers, right? No matter how many user testing and surveys you do, there is nothing better than actually releasing the feature and learning from it, like how users are using it. And that is actually what we did. Now, when I talked about we build an end-to-end flow, what we did was we built something called the ideal flow. That is the flow that we want our end state to be in. But if we spend a lot of time on building that end state and releasing it, we might still fail, right? So what we wanted to do was figure out what could be the MVP, learn from the MVP, and iteratively build towards that ideal state. For this, we worked with our PM, our engineering partners, our marketing partners, our data partners, and all the other functions to figure out what could be that MVP be through which we can start learning and building iteratively, right? So the one that we came up with was minimally how do we solve the problem of data entry by showing only certain fields depending on which employee they're filling the data for, right? We designed for this MVP, another quick user testing session to see if this works, made the tweaks, tested again, and worked with engineering to get it built. And we released this as our first MVP. Now, when we released this, we actually reduced the time of data entry from 25 minutes to 10 minutes when we compared Q2 data. So with this being released, we saw how customers are using it for 1 quarter, gathered the data, saw, okay, this is how they've been using it. There are new learnings that we got from how they are using it. For example, one of the learnings that we got was that there are certain customers who don't need to enter all the data at all. They could just add up all the data, like enter a consolidated information for each quarter, and then they could just start running payroll. We did not know that. We only figured that out as we released the first version and got started getting feedback. So once we realized that, what we did was we created this new version where you could do consolidated data entry, design that, tested that, work with engineering, release that as well. The next version actually saw a huge drop in onboarding time and increased our usability score as well. Now, this was a good feeling compared to the initial idea of with our initial idea getting totally rejected. Now, unfortunately, we still haven't got to the goal of getting to run payroll on the day of the purchase, but we're still not finished with this. We're still learning from the field about how users are using this feature, and we're working on learnings from the second version also to make the onboarding process even better. Now, so a very quick summary of on how to solve the problems in the right way. Go broad on the solutions, test them at a very high level with rapid prototyping, pivot if you need to, narrow down on a solution that you can say that it really solves the problem for the customer, define your MVP, build iteratively, ship, learn, and repeat.
Thank you, Natarajan. At this stage, I would like to, draw attention towards some of the key aspects that we discussed throughout the session. If you had noticed, the driving team that we had in, with respect to when it comes to the research elements, the research phase, as well as on the solution phase, going broad to do concepts of multiple solutions and validating them fast with customers. The driving team always had the product managers and the designers in it. So, the product managers and designers very closely collaborate here at Intuit for all the products that we work. Although there is a quad including the data team and also the product developers as well. The interaction between PMs and XDs is actually multifold when it comes to solving the new problems for our customers. And it has multiple touch points, as we have seen as well. And then when we looked at also the research elements, some of the aspects that I would like you to recall is essentially that the aspects about how we did research, for example, even during both the post-pandemic and the pre-pandemic stages, some of the virtual tools are actually redefining the way we are working. And we are actually getting very, very close to gaining very similar insights between both the physical way of interacting with customers and gathering information face to face, as well as also on the virtual side, the tools that is helping us to gain the right set of feedback while doing the research. One of the other aspect, like as we discussed during the example about, for example, how we took the feature discovery framework, how do we position the feature contextually to our customers. In those example, if you recall, defining the problem was the bulk of it. If we had gotten the problem right, understanding what really was missing in the equation, that almost got us to already to 80% of solving the problem in the right direction. And then in the second example, we also saw that the element about the first idea and that the team falling in love with the first idea, that generally a lot of times happens even for us. When you hear a problem, a lot of us engineers in India, you'll immediately start to think, for example, hey, what's the solution? How do I solve it, for example, right? And then the first idea that happens, most of the time we fall in love sort of with the first idea, right? So don't settle for your first idea. It may not be the best. Sometimes, in this case, it didn't even work. Sometimes it works, but it may not be still the best way to solve the problem. So always go broad. Take multiple concepts at a very high level. Work with your customers, validate with your customers before settling down for the solution. And even with the solution, always build, continuously, iteratively, right? So rapid testing and building incrementally are two important elements in the second phase that I want all of you to recollect from this session as well. That do not take a huge scope and look at take a build time and then deliver the scope. No, these days all the things that we are building is essentially take a smaller scope, and with that smaller scope, go incrementally to add new features and new elements into that solution scope to see how it is constantly reacting with the market. Is it still solving the right problem? Is it still achieving the fit that we are expecting with the market, right? So the incremental aspect is very important in terms of building the problem. With that, let me conclude the session. Thank you so much for watching this episode. Go and build amazing products. Thank you, everyone.